Welcome back to the Newcomers People, where I explore what it means to be an immigrant with immigrants like myself. Today, I'm talking to Anam and Haroon of Qissa. Qissa means story. So they are the couple behind Driving Canada, where they tell the story of immigrants who moved here and have to drive Uber, while they're trying to settle in. This was a really dark conversation, honestly. It was a dark conversation. I think that when I'm done with this, I need to go sit down and decompress a bit because we talked about some really, really sad stuff. But I should probably let you go listen to it. But I want to just say this. It's no fun at all that we have this thing where people come here, and a cardiologist has to go drive an Uber because they can't find their way into the system or have to go through multiple hoops. Like, Canada loses, the immigrant loses. It doesn't make sense at all. Like, it doesn't make sense. But yeah, let's get to it. So I'm curious, how long have you been in Canada now? How long now?
Since 2019. So it's coming up to about 6 years this August.
How does it feel? Like, do you feel like, yeah, this was a great call? Or do you feel like, okay, this was good, there's more to do?
That's a heavy question.
I know, especially because of what you all are doing.
It's how should I put it? It's been more challenging than I thought, for sure. And would I go back and make a different choice or decision? I don't know if I could have because of what kind of brought me to Canada. But I think that I've realized that it's the journey of immigration. I say this, I'm an anthropologist by training. I work with oral history, so I have broader like sense of like what immigration is about. But actually living through it, I think what I've realized is it's a lot more complicated. It's not linear as we often imagine it to be, and so I'm still navigating it, still trying to make sense of it all.
Harold, what do you think? I want to hear yours too.
Yeah, so I think it's complicated. Like there's no easy answer. So there's no it's not all good, it's not all bad. Like it's so as Anna mentioned, I think why we ended up moving is a very important factor. So like we it wasn't really our first choice. We I would have liked to remain in Pakistan. We were very happy there in terms of our where we were professionally, emotionally, with our family, with our community. Like we're both big community people, and just being around community was so that was a very important part of being in Pakistan. But then coming here, like I mean, it was exciting in some ways because suddenly we also knew that. I mean, for me, like I knew that there'll be some things that I'll be able to do which I wouldn't be able to do in Pakistan. So one of them was, as you were mentioning, like engaging with different communities and recording their stories. We both were doing oral histories in Pakistan, but it was very limited to Pakistan because of our own resources. And suddenly coming to Canada just opens up so much more in terms of the stories you could tell. So that was a huge possibility. I mean, I hated the fact that I had to end my 10, 15 years of career in Pakistan and start from the scratch. I thought I was too old to do that. I had no intentions of doing that. Um, I've made some amazing friends, amazing communities like Qissa itself, and the kind of support we've received from everybody. That has also kind of been so important, so fundamental. So I think I think it's a bit of both. Like so what I tell my friends and I joke about it is that like part of you feeling home at a place is that you learn to love it and you also love to hate it. So when you start hating a place and loving it at the same time, that's when you can say that this is kind of home for me. And I feel like in many ways, I guess more than Canada, like Toronto feels that for me. Like so Toronto does feel like home now after 6 years, but also so because I love the city and I also hate the city, and that's just like maybe a simplified way of saying that it's complicated.
That's the first time I'm hearing that where you say, love, hate. And it absolutely makes sense because, they say this thing about immigration is that when you move, you stay in what they call the honeymoon phase. And you're in there for the first 2, 3 months. Like everything is beautiful, everything is amazing. And then you switch from the honeymoon phase to the phase where you're like, what the hell did I do to myself? Why did I move here? What is going on? Like you absolutely hate everything. And so it kind of makes sense when you say love hate, because I think that's like because that's the balance. Like that's, the world likes to talk about the bad side of things as if it's what's it called, it's horrible, but yin yang, it's a good, bad, good. Like love hate is really what it is, because no one can say they absolutely love a place. Like anyone that says that is absolutely lying to themselves. Like, so you love it and you hate it, which is like, that is a natural human state. I hate this part about it, but I love this part about it. So now I'm going straight to Kisa. Like, how did you all get there? I mean, because I think it's such an amazing idea, but I think what I find really amazing about it is that, like I said on the pre-show, we joke about the Uber thing with immigrants, but if you unpack it for what it is, it's not a joke at all. Like people talk about it in passing, and we just say, "Oh yeah, yeah," you find the Uber is the best place to have a heart attack because it's very possible that the Uber driver is a cardiac surgeon in his home country. But it sounds funny, but it's not funny. That's someone's career who's basically just they've had to go through. I can just imagine all the mental struggles they had to go through while they're processing, like, why am I doing this when I could be giving much more. And I'm just trying to understand, like, from for both of you, like, what led to this, like, how did we get here, why are you doing it, just to understand that.
Maybe I can kick us off and then Haroon, please add anything that you'd like to. So Qissa, the word, firstly, means story, right?
Oh, nice.
And Harun and I have both worked with oral histories in South Asia over the past 10, 15 years. And we both write books. My books in particular are for political nature. And, when I first moved here, I started to think about, what are the stories I want to tell? And honestly, I moved here so I could continue telling the stories I really wanted to write about. But one of the challenge that I ran into was, do those same stories make sense when I'm telling them to a different audience, right? When I'm writing from Pakistan, in South Asia, I consider my writing kind of going against the grain, kind of challenging state narratives, dominant ideologies, power centers. But sometimes, as a racialized Pakistani, as a Muslim Pakistani, if I'm telling those same stories here, they're almost the expected stories from regions like Pakistan. And when I'm writing about them in Western press, for quote unquote Western audience, there is a white gaze. And so as I was kind of navigating this, I stopped writing for the first 2 years after I moved. I just didn't know what stories I wanted to write, so I stopped, and it was very unsettling for me, because writing is something I do, it's something I love, it's the reason why I moved. But then I started to think, well, what are the stories that are important from Canada to tell? What are some of the official narratives here? And what are some of the stories that are not being told? Because that's what oral histories are for me. They allow us to tell extraordinary stories about ordinary people, stories of people that don't make it to textbooks, right? Often the untold, the lesser told stories. So we founded Qissa as an artist collective back in 2020 with this intention that we're going to collect oral histories here. And we work with diasporic community. We started off mostly working with the South Asian community because that's where we had relationships. But as we spent more time and as we had more lived experience as immigrants, it started to take its own shape in life. And it's really organically become what it is today. One of the things that happened, which particularly inspired Driving Canada, was that we had a baby 2 years ago. Prior to that, living in Toronto downtown, we would use public transport a lot more. But with her, we often had doctor's appointments, especially because she was in daycare and she was getting sick very, very often. So we started to take Ubers around the city more than we did previously. And most people, we were kind of sitting with were immigrants. Almost all of them were racialized, many of them from our part of the world, from Global South largely, many from South Asia in particular, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh. Many spoke our language. And so we very quickly began to have conversations during our long Uber ride stuck in Toronto traffic. And, every second person was an ENT, a cardiologist, a lawyer, a veterinarian, you name it, all kinds of professions. Right? And we would start having a conversation about what you did before you moved. And there was a whole life story beyond driving Uber. And we connected over these. But what these stories were also telling us were some of the structural challenges that immigrants face, right? So, whether that's devaluing of your credentials, right? Whether that's underemployment, or it's things like not being able to find a spot for your child in daycare and having to send your child back home and being separated from them. So we started having these conversations about how much these encounters and these conversations were telling us about the larger systemic issues, and how often, especially when you're driving Uber, because it's the gig economy, it's fragmented, how often people think it's only their story. And it's not, right? By this time, I had also faced a lot of my own challenges as a newcomer landing a job. It took me over a year. I have an undergrad from McGill. I have a master's degree from University of Toronto. So I have a lot more of that cultural capital that's supposed to make you succeed. But I ran into a lot of those challenges. I was working at a settlement agency with other newcomers and refugees, and I just knew that the stories I'm hearing in an Uber are not isolated instances. Right? These are bigger stories about the systemic challenges that so many and too many immigrants continue to face day in and day out. And then there was this one incident in particular where we were returning from our doctor's pediatrician. It was I can't even count what visit this was. She kept being put on antibiotics. She needed a small surgery, but we needed to get to an ENT to make that happen. And we were on the list of many, but had not heard back. And it had been a few months. So we're very frustrated, kind of sit in an Uber, and our driver was from Afghanistan. And we began this conversation and we said, where are you from? And he told us, and I said, what were you doing before? And there was this silence. And usually people are excited to tell us what they did, but there was a silence. And I started to wonder, did I say something wrong? And then his voice cracked, and his eyes welled up, and he said, I was an ENT. And so that just kind of sitting in the car with him as desperate parents on the wait list, we all run into those challenges, understaffing of healthcare and all of those pieces. And here he is trying to, make ends meet for his kids, taking evening classes, trying to retrain, but he was in his late 50s. I don't know if that was going to happen for him. And I think that disconnect, it just made it so stark. So all of these stories kind of shaped Driving Canada. And then we partnered with Pier 21. Maybe Haroon, if you want to add something there.
Gosh.
Yeah, and I think part of this is like one story, but also like the more we were talking to our Uber drivers, it just became more and more obvious that you could just learn so much about the current social political situation in Canada, in Toronto, in Ontario, just by speaking with your Uber driver. So we had university professors who were doing Uber as a third job to make ends meet. And this is just around the time of when the conversation around cost of living is coming up. So you hear people already kind of doing all of these things. As Anna mentioned, there was somebody who just could not get a spot on daycares. And Toronto, I don't know if Calgary has a similar issue, but Toronto has a huge daycare shortage issue. And so people had to send their kids back to India because they had to have two jobs. So you could just tell so much about what is happening in Canada right now just by speaking with a lot of Uber drivers. I think also what is also for me and Anam both of what also really inspired us because Anam had some experience of working in a settlement agency, and I was working with an organization that also works with newcomers. And it's just like it was surprising for me the lack of understanding of newcomers. So it seems like every newcomer understands this about some of the structural issues. Like there's some conversations about what how the system is kind of geared towards them and what they need to do, but a lot of people who work in the sector and who are not newcomers necessarily, like the conversation that they were having was we need to upskill the newcomers, we need to teach them English, we need to do this, we need to do that. And over time, and Anam and I have also, like, I mean, in our own heads, we were getting kind of frustrated by that, because essentially that's not what is reality on the ground. Like, so a lot
Yeah.
of these skilling programs that you have for newcomers are focusing on skilling and language, whereas the immigrants who are coming to Canada are PhDs, are double masters, have done this, have done that, are fluent in two, three, four, two official languages and multiple other languages. And like, how can we even talk about upscaling them? So for us, like, what was also happening was that all this conversation about providing skills to newcomers also takes away from the structural issues that Canada needs to address. So it was also coming from that very social justice lens that, no, like, newcomers understand these issues, but people who are working in the industry, people who are working with
They don't.
newcomers, don't. Like, I mean, they still talk about like, I mean, I still can't believe that within settlement agency, language is the number one thing which is funded by settlement agencies, whereas 60% of immigrants to Canada come through the skilled immigrant program, which means that they have advanced level of language. And still the most funded program for newcomers is language. So that is still where how Canada imagines newcomers. So it was coming from that that lens as well. That we need to people need to understand who newcomers are, and they are being forced into the gig economy, because we still have those stereotypical views of what global South looks like.
It's like, I mean, and I'm that story you told. I'm still processing it in my head because it's it's I don't know, because like you're a parent, you're carrying your kid who's sick and who's the surgery, and then you're in an Uber with someone who, and then there's a wait list. Like, it absolutely never makes sense to me. And man, I think for me is like the thing. I'm always stuck between two worlds, which is, like I said before we started, I said I'm tired of playing the victim. I'm also tired of fighting. And like there's an episode I released last week, where the guy talks about time, and he talks about how a lot of things, I think, in things take a very long, like systems take a very long time to unbundle and put back together, or restructure them in ways that suits the world we currently live in. And I like that, because I said to him, I really like that. Is like, because he moved to Canada like 40 plus years ago, and when he talks about what he sees now, his view is very different, because he's has like a 40-year view of the world he moved into and the world he lives in right now. And it was very interesting. It was a refreshing take, because like I started to also, what I took from that conversation was that is we need to do the work and just kind of accept that some of these things will take much longer, you know. But I think the key thing is that we also need to make sure we start having the right conversations, because it just feels like we're not even having the right conversations yet at all. We're not talking about the right things, because if you start the right conversations, then you can start to say what is the right playbook to build from base of those conversations that we're having, you know. Because you're right. When I was speaking to Fatima, and the executive director of Impact Foundation, she says the same thing. We need more newcomers to work in settlement agencies, because the point is that most of the programs we currently have are not exactly designed for newcomers. There's an outdated view of the Canadian immigrant. Like, that's the truth. There's a totally outdated view of the Canadian immigrant. And if language is the most funded thing, then that system is out of touch. Like, that's the truth. It's just out of touch. Because I speak English, I speak French, I speak my native language. I hear a smashing of Spanish. Like, I can hear outside. I probably, in my head, I have 5 or 6 languages going around my head every single time. So if I move here, like when I moved, I refused to go to any of the settlement programs, because I was like, there was nothing. I said, there's nothing there for me. Like, there's nothing. What am I going there to do? I have an MBA. Like, what are you going to teach me? Like, what are you telling me how to write my CV? Like, you tell me how to write my CV? Come on now. Come on. What are you talking about? But again, I also accept that was a rant. I also accept that these systems are things don't change as fast as we want them to change. And probably we just need to kind of put in the work and hopefully drive the right conversation, and hopefully they will change. But anytime I have this conversation, I always like have to spend a bit after the recording decompressing, because I'm always like, why are we doing this?
And if I can just add to that, I think we don't realize the toll that takes on people. So every newcomer I speak to ends up individualizing, right, their failure, quote unquote. So if they are not landing a job, if they are struggling, because the message, the top down, very paternalistic message is, you must be doing something wrong. You should know better English. You should write your resume in this way. You should frame it in this way.
Gosh.
It's all you.
Anam, that is so good. Gosh.
And I, when I was working in the settlement sector, I was running a volunteer program, and these were all newcomers and refugees who were coming to volunteer just to gain Canadian experience. And these were pediatricians with 15 years of experience, right? Just to put something Canadian on their resume. And everybody I speak to ends up, saying to me, thank you for saying this is not just me, because I was now having a really hard time, right? And I know, because I had, again, I want to preface this by saying Haroon and I can come with a lot more privilege and cultural capital and all of those pieces than some other newcomers do. But even when I was going through this process, even though I was able to intellectually understand that some of these are systemic issues, the rejections feel really personal. It's very, very hard not to internalize that as something that I'm doing wrong, because in application after application, I'm not hearing back. And I finally heard back once I took Pakistan off my resume, right? I know people who've had to change their names entirely. And even once I did that and the interviews came, my first job, I was underemployed. I'm still underemployed, right? And it's really hard not to buy into the narratives that we're told that if you just struggle hard enough, you'll get there. Like, I feel like we've made it a rite of passage for immigrants to struggle, for immigrants to drive Uber or to flip burgers or to work at Tim Hortons. Like, this is a problem, and we glorify that by calling it resilience. I'm starting to get very, very frustrated with that term, right? Yes, immigrants are resilient, but why do they have to be? So can we not glorify that struggle? Make this, there's a white gaze in terms of how we see that. You have to do this. Everybody does this, and eventually you will succeed. But we don't realize the toll that's taking on people's mental health and emotionally on them, and the fact that not only are they new here and trying to build community, many times these experiences mean that they get cut off from their community back home, because almost all the Uber drivers we spoke with, they said our families back home did not know what we're doing. When we FaceTime with them, we might show them this building, here's where we work, because we want to protect them. So now you're being isolated from those back home because you don't want them to know, because there's an illusion of what immigration is supposed to look like, and the reality is so different. And then you are also alone here, and you're navigating the system thinking it's your fault, you better upskill. So there's a huge damage if these systems don't change. There's an everyday damage that's
Yeah.
happening.
Like someone called it, I think it was Wumi. Sorry, I've spoken to a ton of people. So Wumi called it the it's a three-way loss. So first of all, when an immigrant leaves their home country loses that talent, tax, future tax from their kids, or they lose someone. We bring them to Canada, and then we don't utilize their talent. Canada loses. The immigrant is struggling with confidence and their personal identity. The immigrant themselves suffers a personal identity loss or a loss of self-esteem. So literally, in the end, just because that the system wasn't designed to properly make sure it integrates people as it should, everyone has just lost because someone immigrated to Canada. Like, and then so why should that happen? Like, what does that doesn't even make sense when you think about it that way, because then it's like you're better off sitting back at home, or are you really better off? Okay, no, maybe you're not. Okay, I want to move, but then you have to go through all this. I I mean, I don't know what the full answer is, to be honest. I feel like the full answer is probably this: can we even start having the right conversations? Like, I think like that. I mean, that's probably summarizing it a bit much, but it's more like, can we even start asking the right questions? Can we have more newcomers or immigrants basically saying, I want to be part of those who run the settlement agency programs and advocate for policy or how the programs were structured? Because, like Fatima once said, they spoke to immigrants and asking them, like, hey, what do we give you They didn't say they wanted they wanted you to give them language. They wanted belonging, and they wanted to feel like they belong in Canada. They wanted to feel like this place is home. And I believe strongly that if you don't find your way economically, you're never going to feel like you belong. You're always going to feel like the other, because you're basically at the fringes of society, just trying to at least give yourself some form of who you were before, like just some form of, okay, yeah, what, I was a doctor before, probably. Let me just even try to at least be a nurse, for example, or a medical intern, and then I can start to feel like, okay, I'm on the journey towards finding myself again. But instead, you're driving an Uber because you can't just get into the system. This is a pretty sad conversation. I'm sorry.
No, I'm sorry, but no, but I think it's very important to have these conversations, right? I think also sometimes when people hear this, the quick answer can be like, when the why did you come? If you were better off, go back. And I think it's important to situate these conversations amid like the landscape that we're in right now, where there is an anti-immigration sentiment. And I know, we sometimes say this, maybe it's not anti-immigrant, it's anti-immigration. I don't think the two can remain so insulated from one another. So, but I think we need to remember that Canada does not let everybody in. There's a very competitive process, especially through the economic category, which is the predominant category that people are able to come to Canada. It's a very rigorous process. It's very difficult to qualify. So it's not that everybody is coming in here, firstly. You are, selecting and cherry picking individuals to come in, and then you're devaluing and dehumanizing them. And when we strip a country of a resume, or we strip ourselves of a past experience, it is not just that experience or that country. A lot of times it means an entire culture is ripped away from you, right? Because you're being, the messages get closer to white proximity, essentially, right? And in that, so much of your past experience and your culture and your community gets stripped away with that. And so there is a deeply isolating process. We need to understand that this is not just about reframing your resume, right? And we also have to understand that we cannot look at this without using a lens of racism, because there are certain qualifications in certain countries that have to do more of this work. I remember when I was interviewing for one of my positions, they told me that sometimes our recruiters ask us if we're comfortable hiring somebody with an accent. We are not referring to a British accent here. We are also not referring to an Australian accent here.
Yeah.
So I think when these conversations happen without that racial lens, right, without that class lens, then we are only having a partial conversation. It's a very convenient conversation. These are difficult. And I know this is a sad conversation, it's a difficult conversation, but I think we need to get more used to being uncomfortable, because maybe that's how we start to shift things. I'll stop talking now. I've said a lot.
No, that's okay. I mean, I do think that, so I do think that the two sides to it. Like, I agree it's a difficult conversation, but I also think that, like, so society always, and I'm paraphrasing someone here, and a friend of mine, Ash, society always seeks homeostasis. Like, it's always seeks everything to be equal and in balance. Immigration is anti-homeostasis, because when you bring people from different cultures in, what society starts to do? Society starts trying to force a balance. Now we can talk about the way that balance is done because of all the various things, racism and all that. That's a different conversation. But I think is just now the good thing about what immigration does, though, is in the process of trying to create homeostasis with all that different cultures, society becomes more resilient, more creative, more innovative, wealthier. A lot of things happen just because of immigration. So that's the good side to it. But I'm just trying to say, like, we also need to understand that what we're seeing sometimes is a biological thing that is happening, because society will always try to find a state in which everything is in equilibrium. Immigration will always upset that equilibrium. Now, then once we agree on that, the next question is really, okay, what kind of world do we want to live in? And what are the things what are the legacies that we've carried into this world that is defining how these things are happening? Because, I was saying to someone that, and this thing is just especially a very Western conversation also, because the West is a more immigrant heavy side compared to maybe like Pakistan or Nigeria, where I'm from. Like most a lot of people don't immigrate to Nigeria, so we don't probably have this sort of conversation. So it's also good to kind of understand those things. So what I'm just trying to say is that I'm at a point where I'm like, it's like I feel like there are two sides to the conversation, and it's like, cause how do we find one thing I'm thinking a lot about these days? How do we find a way to bring both parties to the table to have a balanced or a nuanced conversation that accepts the different nuances, and find a way to make it work? Because um there's also the white side of the conversation, whether it's right or wrong, but there's the white side, and then there's the other side of the conversation, the immigrant side of the conversation. Whether it's right or wrong, that's also both parties will always see it that way. That's just how that's one way I now like try to look at it, especially because is when you bring cultures together, what will always happen is that human beings naturally, one of our weakest flaws is we are primed to always seek status, and we always every time someone's always looking to who's superior to the other. It's one thing, one of the biggest flaws I think human beings have. It happens in our home countries. Oh, I'm the superior tribe, and all those kind of things. But yeah, like you said, it's an uncomfortable, hard conversation, and people simplify it. So you strip out racism. You can't strip out racism because you need to talk about the influence of accents and colors and you need to talk about all those things, because it's when you talk about them, then that's when you can now say, how do you find a way to work together and live together and build a new society? Because I think that the world we are moving to is a very different world from the one we're coming from. But yeah, me and you have been talking too much. I wonder if Haroon has anything to say.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think that there's a couple of things there. I think what you said about having the right conversations, I feel like that is at this point the most important thing. Having conversation. I feel like also like as a society, and that's probably the social media society and now the AI society that we are part of. Like we're always looking for solutions. Like every conversation like Anam and I have had, it's like, okay, so we've raised this problem. Now, what's the solution? And like we don't know the solution. Like we are not here policymakers. That's not our job to find new solutions. And also like maybe there are no solutions at this point. The solution. I mean, how do you get a cardiologist from Afghanistan who's driving Uber to start practicing in ER tomorrow? Like that's not my job to think about it. Maybe it requires a lot of thinking. Of course it does. But also like solution will eventually. So I mean, I think we need to kind of move away from that solution obsessed kind of society. Let's just have a conversation. Let's just talk. Let's just see what the issues are. And I think so that's for me the first important thing. Like need to move away from the idea of solution. Like there is no solution in this conversation at this point. It's only raising a point, and that's okay. We are all adults, complex human beings who can handle those things. I think that's a very important thing for me. I think that the second thing that I wanted to say, which I completely slipped my mind. Sorry. Yeah.
It might come back. But you're right
Right.
about the thing about it. Someone said people say this thing where questions are open doorways, like, and it's if we keep looking for answers, we don't. We limit ourselves. But if we say we want to ask ourselves, what are the best questions or what are the right questions to ask?
Yeah. That's not.
Then
But it has come back. Sorry.
yeah,
It has,
sure, that's okay. Yeah,
yeah. Yeah. So and I think the second thing I wanted to say was I feel like this conversation. You're right. It is heavy. It is loaded. But also like I feel like every immigrant that I'm talking to is having this conversation. Every immigrant knows this, and that's what blows my mind. Like you know this as an immigrant. I'm sure every immigrant that you've spoken with is aware of these issues, and the only people who are not aware of these issues are people who are not immigrants. And that just seems to be like, what is even happening? Like how does everybody who is an immigrant know this, and everybody who is not an immigrant does not understand this? Because firstly, their idea of immigrant is coming through all the Hollywood shows that they see, Seinfelds and Friends, and those immigrants. Like even I was looking at watching Seinfeld the other day, and it had a scene where a doctor, it was a Pakistani immigrant doctor working in New York, and he could not speak English. And I'm like, what kind of weird stereotype? And that's essentially people's perception of immigrants. It's still coming from those lens, and I feel like I feel like it's a heavy conversation, but it's also like this is something which immigrants are experiencing every day. So even if they don't talk about it, it's still part of their existence. And it is heavy because that's essentially what immigration does to you. It really puts a burden on you, which which a lot of
Yeah.
immigrants then end up dealing with alone. And I think gig economy really captures the essence of that in a very interesting way, because gig economy is so isolated. It is meant to isolate you from the unions, from broader economic systems. It's all you and an app, and it's all about ratings. Like, it is by design meant to isolate you, and then you add immigration to it, you add underdevelopment to it, underemployment to it, and it becomes almost explosive. And that's the scary thing. Sorry, I think I made it even more darker.
No. I mean, I love dark. I mean, I get sad, but I mean, I'm not scared of having dark conversation. That's what I mean. I think the thing for me is that, like, I hear you on that, and I agree. You know, and I think the bigger question there is the one big question you raised here is, and it's probably something that needs to be answered with a broader group, is like, why? Like, why is there a disconnect? You know, because I think the first part is us first becoming comfortable with with the fact that there's a disconnect. Because I feel like one of the things is that immigrants know this, but then we don't talk about it also. That's also another thing. We don't talk about it. And there could be various reasons why. You know, there's the fact that you're less confident when you move to a new country. You're trying to make sure you can code switch. You're trying to understand the cultural nuances. You don't understand how things are said. There's all those things. There are all those reasons. But I want to go to the meta, which is basically is I feel like we don't talk enough. That's one. So the question is even asking, getting comfortable with the fact there's a disconnect, and seeing it as a chance to, can we build bridges across with people? You know, there's a story I always say. There's a movie I came across. I was a kid, and I never forgot. I think that thing has guided me all my life. It was a friend's house, and it was a war movie, and a child was asking an older woman why there are bad people and good people in this world, something like that. But I think what struck me was what the old woman said. The old woman said that there will always be bad and good people. However, what you should always do is find the good people and build bridge and do stuff with them, because you can't stop people from being bad. There are various reasons why. It's how do we erase biases? Like, just people, humans will be humans. But then if you can find the good people and you model your life like them and do stuff with them, and then over time, what you can do is you can build a much broader community of good people. And for me, that's how I look at it, is that there's a disconnect, yes, and it's how do we find people who we can work with to help bridge that disconnect, because that disconnect is a function of this lack of understanding. There are stereotypes that, for various reasons that we both know, that have existed for a long time, and so if we must also accept that those stereotypes are not going to just get away within. It might not happen in our lifetime. I tell people that I've made peace with the fact that my lifetime might just be spent telling these stories, and I won't see all the changes I want to see. But that's okay for me, you know, because I feel like if you say to yourself that you must change your lifetime, then you should change yourself, or you do things you shouldn't do, or you just you do things that don't help everything in the long game, in the long term. And that's where I am with it. There's that, because I agree. You raise a very big question. There's that disconnect that just exists. No one, you know, everyone's saying things from their various bastions or whatever. Immigrants are like, look, I'm stressed. The non-immigrants are like, I mean, you all came here. Why did you come here? Yeah, you know, maybe you don't speak proper English, or maybe you're a refugee, you know. And so the question is like, why is that disconnect? And how do we find ways to bridge those disconnects and tell the stories of both parties? Because I'm sure if you spoke to a native, he or she or they will tell you there are many reasons why they see what they see. Are they right? Are they wrong? I don't know. But that's the point, is that that's how they see the world. And I'm not going to label them, or that's what I try to say. I'm just saying, okay, that's your pattern. That's how you understand the world right now. This is how I understand the world right now, is how do we probably hopefully find, and if it doesn't work with you, I'm going to find someone else who wants to listen and who hopefully can help me convince you that there are other sides to this story. It's just Well, it's very complex, to be honest. Like it's easy to say on the podcast, easy, but I think it's harder to do in real life, to be honest, if I'm being honest. So yeah.
Yeah,
And
sorry, go ahead.
no, you wanted to say something. Sorry, yeah.
I was just going to say that really echoing. I mean, it's hard. It's hard to do that, but I do think stories have power. I also think that the podcast you're running, kind of capturing these stories, are so important, because I think one of the other things that happens is that newcomers often get lumped with, like just racialized category, but there are layers of these experiences and their intersections. And I think the more conversations we have, more nuances we're able to bring forth. There's no one newcomer experience, right?
Yes. Yes.
And I also feel like with Driving Canada, what it's allowed us to do, even as oral historians, as storytellers ourselves, is to really understand that nuance in a much more deeper way. It's also allowed us to go beyond stats. We know the figures, we know underemployment
Yeah.
exists. So many people around us know that. We're not the only ones even having this conversation. There are people doing really wonderful advocacy work. Even, I will say, within settlement organizations, there are some folks really trying to drive that change. But I think big data can only tell us so much. Stories really help humanize folks. It really helps humanize who's driving your Uber, who's driving your economy in many ways. So I do see power. And one of the things we're trying to do with Qissa is not just document these stories, but then really use artistic mediums to get them out there, so that they're not just within echo chambers and within policy circles, but really
Yeah.
getting out there with these stories, so that storytelling can then be used to not just amplify these narratives and create deeper understanding and empathy, but also to connect people and make these experiences visible and let
Yeah.
people know that they're not alone. So I do see and I do feel, and that's where my hope is, even in this, work that we're doing, which can be heavy, is that there is power to that. And I've seen that in other contexts. And that's really what drives us, I think, to do this work as well. So
Yeah.
thank you for doing what you're doing. Yeah.
Thank you, and thank you too. I mean, let's go to some more light. I mean, let's move. This is dog deep here. I mean, it's. I was going to ask is, I know that a ton of the stories are sad, but just kind of capturing all the stories and interviewing people driving Uber. Were there any stories that were very uplifting? You're just stories you hear that you're like, oh god, this is so good to hear. Like I want to hear. Were there any good ones?
I mean, the moments. What was really interesting for us to see was that every person that we talked to understood their underemployment and understood the systemic issues, but none of them, quote unquote, regretted their decision to come to Canada. Everybody still wanted to be here, and they were still optimistic. They wanted to spend their life here. Also, like, what people made of their situation. So, for example, I spoke with somebody who was a sales representative, a manager for a pharmacist, for a pharmacy company, and he, of course, was shocked that eventually he had to drive Uber. But then what he did was that he used his Uber experience to learn to improve his language skills and to improve his communication skills. And now he says that I use that for sales, and I absolutely and I loved that story. I'm like, that's such a small part of just how innovative he was. There was another person that I spoke with, once again working for Microsoft for 9 years, had other experience, very highly qualified, couldn't find employment, working in Uber. But then the kind of pride that he took in his work, like that was just so. And his story is so heartwarming. But that moment for me also, like, just connected at such a deeper level. Like, I mean, yeah, he does not want to be in this car driving for 18 to 19 hours, but the pride that he takes in that work, like he had somebody who was out there racist with him while he's driving, and he's like, this is my profession. I have to respect my profession, and I will make sure that you get home safely. And I just, and so, I mean, there's a sadness to it, but there's also such a beauty to it, like the kind of pride he took. And he's like, because I am a salesperson, I am a customer facing person in my previous job. I know this is also a customer level job, customer engagement job, and I'm going to take this as professionally as I can. And I absolutely love that part. So how people used essentially Uber to kind of upskill in their own way. So they were still upskilling, but in their own particular way. So for me, that was something which was really fascinating that came through, like how people made, irrespective of the kind of situation that was forced upon them, they made the best out of that. And that's something I loved hearing from interviews. Anam, do you have anything to add?
I think there's one particular story. There's a couple that we interviewed. The guy was driving Uber previously, has now found another job, and his wife was not. But their story is beautiful because they knew each other during college days. When they both were ambitious, they both went off and built incredible careers in India and decided to move to Canada at different times alone. And when they reconnected here, he was driving Uber, and they tell us this anecdote of their first date where he actually stood her up because he said, time is money. So if I come and meet you, I'm going to lose my Uber ride, and I can't afford to do that. And anyway, they eventually came together, and now they're married. And I think their story is also really beautiful because it shows us like the relationship between the political and the personal, and how these
Yeah.
things they're just so layered, right? Like they found community in each other. They knew each other at a very different time and they were doing really well, and they both struggled here, and in some ways they that also connected them, and has allowed them to kind of build a new life here. So there's stories like that. I think what this project and the work that we do allows us to do is really, because it's life story, we're not just focusing on one thing. So yes, it's driving Canada and Uber as a focus, but if you
Yeah.
really hear the interviews, you look at the interviews, it's such a small part. No way does it define them. No way do they want it to define them. So when we start doing these interviews, we're starting from their childhood, right? And we're hearing stories about community and festivals and how those are also recreated here or not. We're talking about the
Yeah.
airport. We're talking about being able to go back home and meet family. We're talking about reunification with family members. We're talking about, watching Insta reels of fall leaves and thinking that's what Canada is and realizing it's so much more, but then also posting those fall leaves once you're here, right? So it allows us to tell a much more complicated story. There are so many lighter moments in these interviews as well, really beautiful moments, really, really real moments, heartwarming moments. And it's all mixed into that complex experience, like Haroon said at the beginning, right? It's things you love, it's things you hate, and
Yeah.
all of them moved after 2018. So relatively recent immigrants, still navigating, still making sense of it, but very much were clear with us that we are here, and we're going to see this as a phase, and things are going to be better for us. Yeah.
I really love that thing about time is money. The dude is hilarious. He's hilarious, honestly. We're rounding up right now, and I think the last question I have for you all is, because I know you all just reviewed the report. That was well done, by the way. Is What are your biggest takeaways from this? Like, just especially since you not put together a report about the stories you've told. Like, what are your biggest takeaways from this so far, and like, what's next for this? We're gonna have another season of more Uber drivers. Like, what are you thinking of? That sort of thing.
Yeah, I think firstly it's the reinforcement for us that how important qualitative information is. So, I mean, we live in a world which is once again data obsessed, big numbers, because that's just easy to sell for funders, for everybody. But what you miss is these stories which are in this qualitative interview that just get lost. So, for example, like Anna mentioned the ENT specialist. I was recently driving, and he's not part of the project because I met him like 2 days ago. I was going to a concert, and he was driving me, and he was a cardiologist who used to work in Bangladesh. Uh, and interestingly, so I've only met two surgeons while driving Uber. The rest have all been professional, but like surgeons, actual surgeons. And both of the time when I asked them what they did back in their home countries, both of them took a minute. Nobody else took a minute, but they both just became quiet and took a minute and then responded. Now, the point is that when we are telling a qualitative story, like that 1 minute of silence, like that itself is a story which cannot be captured in data. Like how can you measure that in data? Like that moment of a middle-aged man who's probably my father's age stops for a minute before telling me what he does, and both of them are embarrassed, but they still so that's the whole point. Like, I mean, for us it just reinforced that thing that there is qualitative data just gets so much nuance, and we are so obsessed as a society with data, big data numbers, that we forget these really small moments, these silences that are so important. Another thing that came across in the interview was this one person was talking about his experience of lack of Canadian experience. He was a racialized person talking about it. And and while we were doing the stories, Anam and I are both racialized, but we had two people in the room who were not racialized. Um, and just for a second, when he talks about Canada in a slightly critical manner. He just looks at them for a second and then looks back at us and tells that story. And I was just thinking, if those people were not in the room, his reaction would have been so different. He would have told the story very differently.
Yeah.
So just like who is asking question, where are they asking those questions, who else is in the room, everything just shapes the way people tell the story. So sometimes we get these big statistics about so many Canadians love this and so many Canadians don't love that. They never tell you, like, if as anthropologists, you can just deconstruct that at so many levels. There's so many nuances that are missed. And so that's for me, it's reinforced qualitative information. Anam can talk more about our future plans.
Yeah, so we're hoping that this is a first in a series of projects. Of course, we are an open archive, so always looking for folks who want to, kind of share their story with us if they're driving Uber or in the gig economy. So it's always an open invitation. But we are also hoping that we can use different entry points, whether that is with care professionals, particularly doctors, nurses, personal support workers, whether that's with artists, or that's others in the service industry, folks working, whether in the gig economy or as security guards and so forth, but also folks working in our daycares, nurturing Canada. There are all these entry points that we can use to tell a broader story. So Driving Canada becomes one in a series. That's the idea. We will not only archive, but then use artistic mediums to showcase these stories. What we're really excited about right now is we got the Digital Museums Canada grant. So in partnership with the Toronto War Museum, we're going to be curating an online digital exhibition with these stories and these interviews where audience members will actually have a chance to step into a simulated ride share ride, essentially, take the back seat and get into an intimate conversation with their driver. So we're hoping that, using storytelling, we can really deepen people's understanding, allow people to step into the shoes of an immigrant in the ways that they can, and really hear these stories, learn from them. And that just can be a starting point to so much more, we hope.
I love that idea, actually. That's a really, 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 really good idea. That's a really good idea. But thank you so much, honestly. I mean, and thanks for the work. Because you're right. We data is important, but it's become the thing. It's become the thing above every other thing. And the things you can't capture with data, you just can't capture because data has no metric to use to measure that. Like, no matter how much you try, you can capture the pauses, you can capture the people in the room, you can capture what I'm processing, you can capture the perspective I have because of how I was raised or what I experienced. I just moved to Canada. There's just a ton of things you can capture that only story can capture, but yeah, this has been a very interesting one. Like, thank you. Thank you so much, and thank you. Keep telling those stories. It's like, just keep telling. We need more of the stories out there because we really need to start asking the right questions. Like, for me, like, that's important. We need to start asking the right questions. So thank you again. Like, thank you so much. Yeah, that was something. But again, like Haroon says, I mean, we need to probably get out of we need to find a solution. We should just probably get to what are the questions and just start having the right conversations. And let's even start having the right conversations and start saying, what are the things that we need to change? What are the questions we need to start asking? But yeah, let me go decompress. Thank you so much. As always, thank you. Like, if you got to this point of the podcast, I really, really appreciate you. Like, share, subscribe. If you know someone we should talk to, send them my way. We're on Substack, YouTube, everywhere you get a podcast with there. Just please support us. Ciao.